The great chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room Cole had ever seen in her life. It stretched upward for what seemed like miles, and glowing lights floated in the air like tiny stars. 17 different alien species sat on elevated platforms that circled around the central floor where she stood alone. She could feel their eyes on her, and some of those eyes numbered more than two. Some glowed in the darkness, and some blinked sideways instead of up and down. She had never felt so small in her entire 23 years of existence. Was not a tall woman. She stood at 5'4" with brown hair that she had tied back in a simple ponytail. Her hands were trembling, but she forced herself to keep her chin raised. She was the first human to ever stand trial before this council, and she refused to show them weakness. Her father had always told her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else was more important than fear. Right now she held onto those words like a lifeline. The High Arbiter was a creature called. He stood 12 feet tall with shimmering blue scales that caught the light and 6 eyes that moved independently of each other. When he spoke, his voice echoed through translator devices that hung in the air, and every species in the chamber could understand his words perfectly. Cole of Earth, you have been found guilty of violating Sector 7 quarantine protocols. You have been found guilty of unauthorized interference with a protected species. You have been found guilty of destruction of Council property valued at 300 million galactic credits. How do you respond to these charges? Wanted to scream at them. She wanted to tell them what really happened. She wanted to explain that the children were dying by the thousands from a plague that the Council had decided was too expensive to cure. She wanted to tell them about the nights she spent watching tiny bodies grow cold because medicine existed but no one would provide it. She wanted to describe the moment she decided that she could not watch one more child die when she had the skills to save them. Instead, she simply said, "I did what I had to do." The chamber erupted in murmurs and clicks and sounds that her translator could not identify. Raised one of his 4 arms, and silence fell immediately. The Council has reviewed the evidence. The Council has made its decision. You are sentenced to exile on Prime. You will be remanded into the custody of the Guardian until such time as the Council deems appropriate. Felt the blood drain from her face. She had heard stories about Prime during her time working in the outer colonies. Every spacefaring species knew about that world. It was a planet of eternal storms and black mountains and creatures that description. But the worst part was not the planet itself. The worst part was what lived there. The Guardian was a dragon beast of impossible size and ancient power. Legends said he had existed since before the Council was formed. Legends said he could swallow starships whole and breathe fire hot enough to melt steel. The Council sent their worst criminals to his world, and no one ever returned. He was judge and jury and executioner, all wrapped into one terrifying package. She was going to die. Movement caught her eye, and she saw Hayes pushing through the crowd. He was the human ambassador to the Council, and he was a weathered man in his 60s with grey hair and tired eyes. He had fought for her during the trial, but his protests had fallen on deaf ears. "This is barbaric," shouted as guards moved to intercept him. She saved lives. She broke into a medical facility and stole supplies to cure a plague that was killing children. She is a hero, not a criminal. Turned his 6 eyes toward the ambassador, and his voice grew cold. She destroyed a Council weapons depot. She caused 300 million credits in damage. She violated quarantine protocols that exist for good reason. Those weapons were going to be used to sterilize the planet shot back. You were going to kill everyone on that world just to contain a plague that she proved could be cured. They are a protected species, replied. They are not yet ready for contact with the wider galaxy. Her interference has contaminated their development. The Council will now be forced to take corrective measures. Understood what that meant. Corrective measures was a polite way of saying they would wipe the memories of everything that had happened. They would erase the cure she had given them and let the plague return. All those children she had saved would die anyway. She caught Sai and shook her head slightly. Starting an interstellar incident would not help anyone. Humanity was still a young species in the galactic community, and they could not afford to make enemies of the Council. Not yet. 2 guards approached her. They were soldiers with 4 arms and armor that covered their bodies like shells. They grabbed her roughly and began to lead her away from the central platform. Cole called out, and she paused to look back at him. "Let your fate serve as a lesson to your species. Humanity is young. Humanity is weak. You do not yet understand how order is maintained in this galaxy. Perhaps watching you disappear will teach your people their place." She wanted to say something defiant. She wanted to tell him that humanity would never accept their place. She wanted to promise that her people would remember what happened here, and that one day the Council would answer for its crimes. But she was tired, she was scared, and deep down she knew that her words would change nothing. So she stayed silent and let the guards drag her away. The corridor outside the chamber was long and cold, and lit by strips of pale blue light. Her footsteps echoed against the metal floor, and the guards said nothing as they marched her toward the detention level. She passed windows that looked out into space, and she could see the council station hanging against a backdrop of distant stars. Somewhere out there was Earth. Somewhere out there was her home and her family and everyone she loved. She wondered if they would ever know what happened to her. She wondered if anyone would remember her name. The detention cell was small and bare with nothing but a hard bench and a thin blanket. They pushed her inside, and the door sealed behind her with a hiss of pressurized air. Sat down on the bench and finally allowed herself to cry. She cried for the children she had saved and the children she could not save. She cried for her family who would never see her again. She cried for herself because she was human and she was afraid and she did not want to die. But even as the tears fell, she felt something else burning in her chest. It was anger. It was defiance. It was the stubborn human spirit that had carried her species from caves to the stars. If she was going to die on some alien world, then at least she had done something worth dying for. At least she had stood up for what was right. At least she had proven that one person could make a difference even against impossible odds. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. Whatever came next, she would face it with her head held high. The prison transport was a small, ugly ship that smelled like rust and fear. Had been aboard for 6 days, and in that time she had spoken to no one. The crew avoided her like she was already dead, and perhaps to them she was. Everyone knew what happened to prisoners sent to Prime. She spent most of her time out the tiny viewport in her cell. The stars blurred past in streaks of light as the ship traveled through hyperspace, and she tried to memorize every detail. These might be the last stars she ever saw. On the 7th day, the ship dropped out of hyperspace and got her first look at her new home. Prime was a nightmare-given form. The planet hung in space like a bruise against the darkness, and purple storms swirled across its surface in constant fury. Lightning cascaded through the clouds in sheets of electric blue, and she could see jagged black mountains rising above the chaos. Nothing about this world looked welcoming. Nothing about it looked survivable. The pilot was a nervous alien caller. He had long antennae that twitched constantly, and his compound eyes refused to look directly at her. When he came to her cell, his voice was shaking. "This is as close as we go. You take the drop pod. The Guardian will find you soon enough." What happens then? Asked, even though she already knew the answer. The finally met her eyes, and she saw something like pity in his alien face. "Then you die, quickly if you are lucky." They gave her a basic environmental suit that would protect her from the worst of the atmosphere. They gave her enough rations to last maybe a week. They gave her nothing else because they expected her to need nothing else. The drop pod was barely large enough to fit her body. She squeezed inside and strapped herself in and tried not to think about what was coming. The pod launched before she was ready, and suddenly, she was falling through space toward the churning storms below. The descent was violent. Fire licked at the viewport as the pod burned through the atmosphere, and she screamed as turbulence threw her against the restraints. Alarms blared in her ears and warning lights flashed red, and she was certain that she would die before she even reached the surface. Then impact. The pod hit the ground hard, and everything went black. When woke up, her head was pounding, and her body ached in places she did not know could ache. She fumbled with the restraints and managed to push open the hatch with trembling hands. Harsh purple light flooded in, and she took her first breath of prime air. It tasted like copper and smoke. She climbed out of the pod and looked around at her new world. She had landed in a valley of black stone surrounded by twisted trees that reached toward the sky like grasping fingers. The storms raged overhead, but here in the valley the wind was merely harsh rather than deadly. Lightning flickered in the distance, and thunder rolled across the mountains like the heartbeat of some massive creature. Was alone, completely and utterly alone. She could have sat down and cried. She could have given up and waited for death to find her, but she was human, and humans did not quit easily. Her species had survived ice ages and plagues and wars and countless other disasters. One more hostile environment was not going to break her. She took stock of her supplies and made a plan. Water first, then shelter, then food. Basic survival priorities that applied on any world. The first 3 days were the hardest of her life. She found water in underground pools that glowed with bioluminescence. She built shelter in a cave that smelled like but kept out the worst of the storms. She learned which plants burned the skin and which could be eaten without dying. She fashioned weapons from sharp stones and the metal scraps of her drop pod. Every night she lay awake listening to the sounds of the alien wilderness around her. Creatures howled in the darkness, and sometimes she heard heavy footsteps that shook the ground, but nothing found her, nothing came for her. Until the fourth day. She was gathering water from her underground pool when she felt the first tremor. It was subtle at first, like a distant earthquake, then it grew stronger and stronger. The ground shook so hard that she fell to her knees and rocks tumbled from the cave's ceiling around her. Something was coming, something massive. Grabbed her makeshift spear and ran to the mouth of the cave. What she saw there made her forget how to breathe. He emerged from the mountains like a living catastrophe. The Guardian was everything the legends claimed and infinitely more terrifying. His scales were obsidian black shot through with veins of glowing red that pulsed like molten lava beneath his skin. His wings spread wide enough to cast shadows across the entire valley, and when he opened his mouth, she saw fire dancing in his throat like a furnace waiting to consume her. He was easily 300 feet long, maybe more. His eyes were gold and ancient, and they fixed on her with an intelligence that she had not expected. This was no mindless beast. This was something old and aware and utterly beyond her ability to fight. Stood her ground anyway. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. If she was going to die, then she would die facing her killer. The dragon beast landed before her close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. His breath smelled like smoke and something older than time itself. "You are small," he said, and his voice was like thunder rolling through mountains. The sound vibrated through her bones and she felt it in her teeth. "They usually send soldiers, warriors. You are neither of these things." "I am a nurse," replied, and her voice was steadier than she expected. "I heal people. That is my crime." The dragon tilted his massive head and studied her with those golden eyes. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. She felt like he was looking into her soul. "Tell me," he commanded. So told him everything. She told him about the plague and the dying children and the council that refused to help. She told him about the medical supplies she stole and the weapons depot she destroyed. She told him that she did not regret any of it because she had saved over 10,000 innocent lives. When she finished, the dragon was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the rumble of distant thunder and the beating of her own heart. "My name is the dragon," finally said. "I have been the council's executioner for 6,000 years. I have consumed warriors and criminals and tyrants and rebels, but I have never eaten a healer." He settled onto the ground and folded his wings against his body. Up close she could see scars on his scales, and she wondered what could possibly wound a creature like this. "You are interesting, little human. I think I will keep you alive for now." Stared at him. She had expected death. She had prepared for death. She had not prepared for this. "Why?" she asked. Slav shook the valley and sent birds scattering from the twisted trees. "Because you remind me of something I thought I had forgotten. Now come, there is much you do not know about this world." He turned and began to walk toward the mountains and found herself following without understanding why. She had come here to die, and instead she had found something she never expected. She had found hope. Led through a hidden pass in the mountains that she never would have found on her own. The path twisted and turned through narrow canyons of black rock, and sometimes she had to crawl through gaps barely wide enough for her body. The dragon walked ahead of her in a form much smaller than before, and she learned that he could change his size at will. It was a trick of his ancient biology, he explained. His kind had been shapeshifters long before most species in the galaxy had learned to walk upright. They traveled for most of the day and was exhausted by the time they reached the other side. But when she stepped out of the final canyon and saw what lay beyond, her tiredness vanished completely. It was a valley, a real valley with green plants and clear water and actual sunshine breaking through the eternal storms. She saw buildings scattered across the landscape and smoke rising from chimneys. She saw figures moving between structures and heard the distant sound of voices carried on the wind. People lived here. People actually lived here. You have a city breathed. The stories say this is a death world. The stories say nothing survives here. The stories are what the council wants the galaxy to believe, replied. He had shrunk himself down to the size of a large horse, and his voice had become quieter but no less powerful. "I was appointed guardian of this world 6,000 years ago. The council feared my kind. We were old when they were young, and our power threatened their control. They sent me here with a promise. I would dispose of their problems, and in return they would leave my world in peace." Stared at him. "You were supposed to kill everyone they sent." "I was supposed to, yes, but I found that I had my own sense of justice. Not everyone the council sends here is guilty of real crimes. Some are merely inconvenient, some stood up against tyranny, some like you did nothing wrong at all. So you let them live," said slowly. "You built a sanctuary." His massive head. "Welcome to New Haven, little healer." The descent into the valley took another hour, and with every step saw more evidence of civilization. There were farms growing alien crops and workshops producing goods and children playing in the streets. The population was diverse in a way she had never seen before. She recognized some species from her time in the outer colonies, but others were completely unfamiliar. Word of her arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the center of the settlement, a crowd had gathered, felt their eyes on her and saw a mixture of curiosity and hope in their faces. Then an elderly woman pushed through the crowd and walked directly toward her. Neither, they were a gentle species with soft grey skin and large dark eyes. Their children had been dying by the thousands before she intervened. This woman had the look of someone who had lived through great tragedy and come out the other side. "You are her," the elder said. "You are the human who saved our children." Did not know what to say. "How do you know about that?" The elder took her hands and held them gently. "Word travels far even to this hidden place. You are celebrated among our people. The council may call you a criminal, but we call you a hero." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She had believed that her sacrifice was meaningless. She had believed that she would die forgotten and alone. But here in this impossible place on this impossible world, she found that her actions had mattered. "I just did what was right," she whispered. The elder smiled, and there was warmth in her ancient eyes. "That is more than most can say. Welcome home, Cole." The following months changed everything thought she knew about herself and about the galaxy. She threw herself into work because that was what she knew how to do. The settlement desperately needed medical care, and her training as a nurse made her invaluable. She established a clinic in an empty building near the town center and began treating patients from dozens of different species. It was challenging work. Each species had different biology and different needs. What healed one might kill another. She made mistakes at first, and some of those mistakes cost lives, but she learned and she adapted and she trained others to help her. A young named became her first assistant. He had been sent to Prime for protesting against forced in the mining colonies, and his antennae were scarred from where they had tried to remove them as punishment. He learned quickly, and his steady hands made him perfect for delicate procedures. Was another human in the settlement. He had arrived 15 years before after exposing corruption in a council contractor. He was an engineer by training, and he helped her build better medical equipment from salvaged materials. The settlement grew stronger with every passing season. More exiles arrived, and most of them were good people who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Judged each one personally, and those found worthy were welcomed into the community. Those few who were genuinely dangerous were dealt with quietly. Asked him once what that meant, and the dragon's answer was simple. Some beings cannot be saved. Some have done things so terrible that they have lost the right to exist among others. I do not enjoy killing little healer, but I do what must be done to protect my people. Your people repeated, "You really care about them." Was quiet for a long moment. They walked together on a cliff overlooking the settlement, and the twin moons hung low on the horizon. His scales reflected the moonlight, and she could see the weight of ages in his golden eyes. "I have lived for 6,000 years," he finally said. "I have watched empires rise and fall. I have seen species ascend to greatness and destroy themselves through greed and fear. For most of that time, I believed in nothing but my own survival." "What changed?" asked. The dragon turned his massive head to look at her. "Beings like you, small fragile creatures who stand up against impossible odds because you believe in something greater than yourselves. You remind me of what I once was before cynicism replaced hope." "What were you?" Young replied, and there was something like sadness in his voice. "I was young, and I believed that the universe could be better. I believed that compassion could triumph over cruelty. Then I watched my entire species die in a war started by the very council I now serve. I stopped believing in anything that day." Reached out and placed her hand on his scaled leg. It was like touching warm stone. "Maybe it is time to start believing again." The dragon laughed, and the sound rolled across the valley like gentle thunder. "Perhaps you are right, little healer. Perhaps hope is not yet dead." Above them, the stars burned bright against the darkness, and somewhere out in that vast galaxy, the council continued its reign of order and control. But here on this hidden world, something new was growing, something that could not be measured in credits or power. It was called community, it was called purpose, it was called home. And Cole had found it in the most unexpected place imaginable. The peace could not last forever, knew this in her heart even as she hoped otherwise. The council was too powerful and their reach extended too far. Eventually they would discover the truth about Prime. That day came on a morning like any other. Was in her clinic treating a young with a broken arm whence voice thundered through the settlement. "Everyone to the great hall, now." She had never heard that tone from him before. It was urgent and worried. and those two things did not belong together when describing an ancient dragon who could destroy starships with a single breath. The Great Hall was a building in the center of the settlement that served as their meeting place and community center. By the time arrived, it was already filling with people. She pushed through the crowd until she found and standing near the front. "What is happening?" she asked. His face was pale. Council ship in orbit, first time in over 200 years. Stood at the head of the hall in his reduced form. Even at the size of a horse, he commanded absolute attention. His golden eyes swept across the gathered crowd, and when he spoke his voice was heavy with concern. "An inspection vessel has arrived," he announced. "Someone has informed the council that this world may hold more than a guardian and empty wasteland. They are coming to verify my reports." Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. Fear was visible on every face regardless of species. "Who betrayed us?" someone shouted. "It does not matter," replied. "What matters is what we do next. I can destroy their vessel easily. My fire would melt it before they could raise shields, but that would bring war. More ships would come and eventually even I would fall. The council has weapons that can wound even creatures like me." Felt her mind racing. There had to be another way. There was always another way if you looked hard enough. "What if we gave them what they expected to find?" she said loudly. Every eye in the hall turned toward her, tilted his head and waited for her to continue. "The council thinks this is a death world," explained. "They think you eat everyone they send, so show them exactly that. Make them believe nothing has changed." "How?" asked. "We hide," said. "Everyone goes underground into the caves on the other side of the valley, puts on a show for the inspection team. He plays the role of savage beast that they expect. When they leave satisfied, we come out and continue our lives." Was quiet for a moment. "It could work," he admitted. "But there is a complication. The inspection team wants to land. They want to see the remains of recent exiles. They want physical proof that I am still doing my duty." "Then give them proof," said. Her voice was steady even though her heart was pounding. "I will go with you. They need to see a prisoner. They need to see fear." The hall erupted in protest, grabbed her arm, and his eyes were wide with concern. "Are you insane?" he demanded. "If something goes wrong, you die." "If we do nothing, we all die," replied. "Every man, woman, and child in this settlement will be executed for the crime of surviving. I cannot let that happen. I will not let that happen." Studied her with those ancient golden eyes. "You understand what you are offering. I will have to make them believe I am killing you. You will have to trust me completely." Met his gaze without flinching. "I trust you." The plan came together quickly because there was no time for anything else. The settlement evacuated into deep caverns that had been prepared long ago for exactly this situation. Supplies were hidden, and evidence of habitation was concealed beneath natural debris. Within 12 hours, the valley looked like untouched wilderness again. Waited within the wasteland on the opposite side of the planet. This was the face of Prime that the galaxy knew: black rock and eternal storms, and nothing living for miles in any direction. The council vessel descended through the clouds and landed on a flat plateau nearby. The delegation that emerged consisted of 5 beings. 3 were soldiers in full combat armor. 1 was a bureaucrat of a species did not recognize. The 5th was a tall female with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she missed nothing. Had resumed his full, terrifying size. He crouched nearby like a mountain of scales and fire, and the delegation visibly trembled at the sight of him. "Guardian," the bureaucrat called out in a shaking voice. "We are here for routine inspection. The council requires confirmation that you are fulfilling your duties as agreed." Rumbled deep in his throat and the ground shook. "My duties are fulfilled. All who are sent to me are dealt with appropriately." The stepped forward. Her name was High Inspector and her voice was cold and professional. "We have received reports that suggest otherwise. We require proof." Turned his massive head toward who stood trembling in her environmental suit. She did not have to fake the fear. Even knowing the plan, her body reacted instinctively to the presence of a predator beyond imagination. "This one arrived recently," growled. "The human who the council would you like to watch?" "Once proceed." What happened next was the most terrifying experience of his life. Roared and lunged toward her with jaws wide open. She screamed and ran because that was what any sane person would do. The ground shook beneath his footsteps and she could feel the heat of his breath on her back. Then his jaws closed around her and everything went dark. She should have been crushed, she should have been burned, she should have been dead. Instead, she found herself suspended in a bubble of hardened air inside his mouth. It was warm but not burning and she could breathe normally. His tongue pressed against the bubble but did not break it. Outside, she heard a crunching sound that she realized was biting down on rocks he had hidden in his mouth. To the watchers, it would sound exactly like bones breaking. She floated there in darkness for what felt like hours. Then she felt movement as turned away from the delegation and walked toward a nearby canyon. He opened his jaws slightly and deposited her gently in a hidden cave. "Stay here," he whispered in a voice only she could hear. "Do not move until I return." Then he was gone, and she was alone in the darkness with nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat. The inspection continued for another 2 hours, heard fragments of conversation carried on the wind. The delegation examined the wasteland and found nothing but death and destruction, played his role perfectly. He was savage and terrifying and exactly what the council expected him to be. Finally, she heard their ship take off and disappear into the sky. A few minutes later returned for her. "It is done," he said. "They are satisfied." Let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Then we are safe." Hesitated, and that hesitation made her blood run cold. "I am not certain," he admitted. "The inspector." She looked toward the northern mountains before she left. "I think she saw something." High above the planet, in the council inspection vessel stood at a viewport and watched the world shrink beneath them. Her aide approached nervously. "High Inspector, the Guardian has performed as expected. Shall I file our report?" Did not answer immediately. She was thinking about a flicker of movement she had noticed near a mountain range that should have been completely lifeless. She was thinking about heat signatures that did not match the expected planetary profile. "Scan the northern region," she ordered quietly. "Full spectrum analysis." Her aide and what they found made smile coldly. Hidden beneath layers of rock and storm interference, there were signs of habitation, structures, energy signatures, life where there should have been only death. "Well, well," she murmured. "It seems the Great has been keeping secrets." She turned to her aide and her voice was ice. "Set course for council space. I have a report to file." 3 months passed after the inspection and life in the settlement slowly returned to normal. People emerged from the caves and rebuilt what had been hidden. Children played in the streets again and farmers tended their crops. Hope returned to the valley like spring returning after a long winter. But remained watchful. He spent hours each day scanning the skies and could see the tension in his ancient body. He was waiting for something. He was expecting something. That something arrived on a clear morning when the storms had parted to reveal blue sky. Was in her clinic when the first tremors hit. They were different from footsteps. These came from above. She ran outside and looked up and her heart stopped at what she saw. Ships, dozens of ships descending through the clouds in perfect formation. They were council warships bristling with weapons and their hulls gleamed with deadly purpose. She counted 40 vessels before she stopped counting. The Armada had come. Rose from the mountains in his full terrifying glory. His wings spread wide enough to create their own weather and his roar shook the planet to its core. He was magnificent and ancient and utterly alone against an entire fleet. "Guardian," a voice boomed across all frequencies and recognized the cold tones of High Arbiter. "You have violated the sacred compact. You have harbored criminals and built an illegal settlement. You have made fools of this council for 6,000 years. Surrender the fugitives and submit to, or we will reduce your world to ash." "You dare threaten me?" His voice was like thunder given form. "I was old when your species still crawled in the mud. I have devoured fleets greater than this." "Then you will die fighting," replied. "Either way the criminals burn." Watched the standoff with growing dread. She knew was powerful beyond imagination. She had seen him breathe fire hot enough to melt stone, but 40 warships was too many, even for him, even for a dragon who had lived 6,000 years. This was the end. Then the communication system in the settlement crackled with a new signal. It was broadcasting on a frequency that the council was not using, a human frequency. "Council Armada, this is Captain Santos of the Earth vessel Constellation. You are hereby ordered to stand down." Felt tears spring to her eyes. She knew that name. The Constellation was the flagship of Earth's United Space Forces. What was it doing here? The view screen in the settlement center flickered to life and showed the space above Prime. What saw there made her knees weak with relief. Emerging from hyperspace behind the council fleet were more ships, human ships, carriers and destroyers and cruisers, all bearing the flag of Earth. They were not as large as the council vessels, but there were many of them, so many of them. "You have no authority here," spat across the communication channel. "Humanity is a junior member of this council. You cannot interfere with official proceedings." "We are not interfering with council business," Captain Santos replied. Her voice was hard as steel and twice as cold. We are exercising our sovereign right to protect our citizens. Cole is a human national illegally sentenced without proper representation. Under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, we are entitled to challenge that verdict." One human snarled and could hear the contempt in his voice. "You would start a war over one human." There was a pause, then Santos spoke again, and her words carried the weight of an entire civilization behind them. "We would start a war over one human. That is something your council has never understood about us. We do not abandon our own, not one, not ever." The standoff stretched for a long, terrible moment, watched the viewscreen with her heart in her throat. The fate of everyone she loved hung in the balance. Then another voice entered the channel. It was High Inspector speaking from somewhere in the council fleet. "Arbiter, I recommend withdrawal. Our scans show the human fleet is significantly larger than initial estimates. They have additional vessels holding position behind their moon. They have been for this confrontation." Silence from the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. All ships finally growled, "Return to Council space, this matter is not concluded." The Council armada began to turn. One by one the warships powered up their engines and jumped to hyperspace. Within minutes they were gone and the sky above Prime was clear. Sat down heavily because her legs would no longer support her. She was shaking and crying and laughing all at the same time. Around her the other settlers were doing the same. They had been saved. Against all odds they had been saved. The human fleet established orbit and shuttles began descending toward the planet, landed near the settlement and shifted to his smaller form, his golden eyes found in the crowd. "It seems your people came for you after all, little healer." "I never expected," whispered. "How did they know?" Slav rumbled through the valley. "When you destroyed that weapons depot, you transmitted the cure for the plague to every medical database you could reach. Your message spread across the galaxy. Your sacrifice became a symbol. When the council sentenced you, your people decided that enough was enough." The first shuttle landed, and its doors opened to reveal Captain Santos. She was a tall woman in her 50s with grey at her temples and eyes that had seen too much. When she found in the crowd, she did something that made everyone fall silent. She saluted. Cole Santos said formally, "Your actions on 4 saved over 10,000 children. When the people of Earth learned what the Council had done to you, our government formally withdrew from the Galactic Compact. We began building a fleet that very day. You started something that cannot be stopped." Did not know what to say. She had been a nurse, just a nurse who wanted to help people. She never imagined that her choices would echo across the stars. "I just wanted to do what was right," she finally managed. Santos smiled, and there was warmth in that battle-hardened face. "That is exactly why humanity needed to know your story. You reminded us who we are." In the months that followed, Prime became something entirely new. It was declared a free world protected jointly by and humanity's growing fleet. Other species disillusioned with the Council's tyranny began seeking refuge there. Ships arrived carrying settlers and supplies and dreams of a better future. A new alliance formed among the stars. It was not built on conquest or control or fear. It was built on a simple idea that humans had carried with them since their days. The idea that every life matters. The idea that no one gets left behind. The idea that compassion is not weakness but the greatest strength of all. Stood with on a cliff overlooking the expanding settlement, ships from a dozen worlds filled the sky and the sound of construction echoed through the valley below them. The Elder had moved here permanently and had played with human children in the streets of New Haven. 6,000 years mused. In all that time, no species has ever stood against the Council for someone like you, someone small, someone who was simply doing what was right. Smiled, "Maybe that is what makes us different. We are too stubborn to know when we are supposed to give up." Slav shook the mountain beneath their feet. "Then perhaps there is hope for this galaxy yet." Above them the stars burned bright with possibility. Somewhere in the darkness the Galactic Council watched and waited and feared. But they did not fear the dragon, they did not fear the fleet. They feared what humanity had proven on this day. They feared the simple truth that one person with courage could change everything. They feared the knowledge that compassion properly defended was the most dangerous force in the universe. The old order was crumbling, a new era was beginning, and at the heart of it all stood a small human woman who had done nothing more than refuse to let children die. Sometimes that is all it takes to change the galaxy. Sometimes that is enough.